Where can we identify some nice fantasy football sleepers at wide receiver? According to the current expert consensus fantasy rankings, it's time to break it down right here and right now as we begin another edition of Locked On Fantasy Football.
Are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. As usual, I'm your host, Vinnie Iyer. I'm not doing this. I'm writing about NFL and fantasy football for sportingnews.com. Check out SN. We will have the fallout of the 2022 NFL schedule being released. That happens Thursday night. We'll have a whole breakdown of that for you. What looks good for fantasy football, the teams that end up with pretty favorable schedules, the teams that are battling some tougher schedules, and how that affects maybe way we look at their players and what they can do in scoring here, whether you're looking at full or half point PPR, full PPR. Well, here on Locked On Fantasy Football, we're going to continue looking at these players that are good values right now. The post NFL draft rankings are up there. So we've taken a look at the quarterbacks, we've taken a look at the running backs, who's underrated, who's overrated. Now it's time to look at wide receivers. So we'll look at the sleeper wide receivers today. We'll take a break from the series and do our reaction to the NFL schedule from a fantasy football perspective on Friday. And then we'll pick it up with the wide receiver potential bust, the overrated players right now based on their ranking and current ADP. So we'll get into wide receivers in a moment. Thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. We are free and available for you on all platforms. Okay. We're going to start kind of in the middle there of the wide receiver twos when we get away from the wide receiver ones, because the top 12 are pretty fair there. There are some overrated players in that, but we will get to that in our look on the flip side of this. But we want to look kind of guys that could return more wide receiver one values first that are more ranked in the early wide receiver twos. And one of those guys, he had a big year last year, Michael Pittman Jr. of the Colts. Now, I like a lot of the circumstances here for Pittman. I think he profiles very similar to Calvin Ridley, where he can be a big slot if needed, but also be a big target in the red zone. That is good for their new quarterback, Matt Ryan, who's used to throwing to Calvin Ridley and likes that type of target. They out and get Alec Pierce in the draft, so they have a little bit more speed on the outside. We also know they have Paris Campbell on the inside. They're also going to be less dependent on the tight end with Jack Doyle, Mr. Dependable, out of the offense. Mo Ali Cox has been pretty productive, but so Pittman has a little bit of help on the outside, some youthful speed there that can help him there. And it's not just T.Y. Hilton who was slowing down, and Zach Pascal, who's a little bit more pedestrian as kind of a slot receiver. At this point, Michael Pittman Jr. looking really good to break out here. I mean, he was already right there in the back end wide receiver one conversation last year in half point PPR, but the scoring is in a good situation. He's a guy that could easily, with the size and the way they use him, get double-digit scores here. So that's appealing immediately as a potential wide receiver one. And then he's going to get pretty nice volume all over the field. And I just trust Matt Ryan a little bit more to get him the ball. Carson Wentz did pretty well to help Pittman produce. But I think with Ryan, he likes to sit in the pocket, throw to these reliable targets with some size, some speed, but also some red zone sensibility. And that's what you're going to get from Pittman here. So I do like a good season for Pittman to challenge some of the top wide receivers in the game. Just a remarkable talent with the size and profile here, and it could really come to fruition, much like we saw early in the career of another USC guy, Juju Smith-Schuster. Now, if I had to make a decision, do I want to invest Pittman a little earlier or Juju with the Chiefs a little later? I'm still going Pittman in the situation with Matt Ryan and the Colts. The next player that is a target at wide receiver that I think is ranked pretty low, he's around 18 to 20. He finished pretty low as a wide receiver 3 last year in his final season with the Cowboys. It's Amari Cooper. And you look at Amari Cooper, we know Deshaun Watson, he loves to latch onto that one guy and help him produce big time. He's also taken advantage of that big play threat outside Will Fuller. But going back to DeAndre Hopkins, Amari Cooper is that type of player and he can produce all over the field. And the Browns are still looking for other reliable receivers. Tight end, a bit of a transition there without Austin Hooper. David Njoku is a pretty good target there. But you look at the rest of the Browns receivers, you got Donovan Peoples-Jones is more of a deep threat. We'll see what else they do in the complementary sets here. So, but looking overall, Amari Cooper is going to see high volume here from Deshaun Watson. Whoever's in a quarterback, if it's Jacoby Brissett, he's going to treat Amari Cooper as a security blanket all over the field when Watson potentially is suspended here. So, Amari Cooper is the smooth route runner. He gets the job done. What really happened in Dallas last year? A bit of a crowd. They kind of looked at the matchups they had for CeeDee Lamb and Michael Gallup and Cedric Wilson. Dak Prescott also like Dalton Schultz in a similar role out of tight end in the short to intermediate route. So Amari Cooper just saw fewer targets and was not as involved there as a clear-cut number one, where I think that flips here with the Browns. Watson is going to get the ball downfield to him everywhere, and there's not a lot here. There's a little bit of supporting cast, but Cooper should, again, dominate with high volume, where he's not being cut in by a very good number two or number three. The Browns are still looking for answers at those positions minus Jarvis Landry. And I think Peoples-Jones, again, we look at him, he can be special, but I think more as a deep threat occasionally, not that consistent target you would expect. Michael Thomas, I think people might be sleeping on him. I think he's left a sour taste in people's heads here because of his play and then disappearance and his injury issues the past couple of years. But Michael Thomas did re-up, which is a bit of a surprise. They didn't move him, and they got a decent deal here worked out. You also got him help, and Chris Olave and Marcus Callaway had some moments last year. So Olave operates more like a number one. So there's going to be some attention put on Olave. You can't just have the double teams on Thomas the way we have the pass is also more of a field stretching team. So Thomas is going to see those intermediate opportunities open up with a threat now of Olave and being able to stretch the field vertically. Thomas is the guy that can get it done horizontally, see a lot of targets here. He's still going to dominate targets. Olave's a rookie, so you got to ease him in as a big play target. But you look at Michael Thomas, again, good chance to rebound in the volume. Half-point PPR can really rack up the targets and catches related to those, and good chances for touchdowns as well. He's usually like a 9-touchdown guy in that range at his best, but opportunity to build on that a little bit more with Jameis Winston. All right, our next wide receiver, underrated, definitely. I mean, he finished pretty strong here without Allen Robinson essentially doing anything last year. So Darnell Mooney, clear-cut go-to guy for Justin Fields. They don't have a lot. They have Byron Pringle as their next option here. But Mooney looking pretty good. I think he's a special player. I think Fields and Mooney have a special kind of chemistry. Mooney is a better all-around receiver than he gets credit for. He is a good, speedy, deep threat when needed, but I think he is turning into more a complete receiver here. And he's clearly the go-to guy, number one. And so when there's someone like that, there are some other targets that can ease the burden off him, but volume-based, kind of like Cooper is here with their mobile quarterback. This is the guy that's going to get it done most here in Darnell Mooney. So a little bit underrated there, looking at the wide receiver two, kind of middle to late there. I think he has an opportunity to jump into the early wide receiver twos, even get in the wide receiver one conversation with his volume and his talent. And the last player I'll talk about is Marquis Hollywood Brown. Now, DeAndre Hopkins is coming off an injury. He's facing a suspension. AJ Green is ancient. He's back. So the color I'm going with is Marquis Hollywood Brown. I think you can't ignore the connection that he and Kyler Murray had in college at Oklahoma. Hollywood wanted out of there. He's a big play threat. The Cardinals were very aggressive to acquire him. He's going to take over slowly as their number one. Hopkins, again, is also getting older, like Green, and could fade a little bit this offense, but really like what Hollywood Brown could do here. Again, as a big play target, Kyler Murray's going to get the ball downfield to him. There's an uncanny established chemistry, kind of like what we have with Devontae Adams and Derek Carr developing with that Fresno State connection. So that's what you're going to see with Hollywood here. He's being ranked pretty low, and good indication is that DeAndre Hopkins is behind him. So if he's behind him, Green is buried. They're going to use the tight ends a little bit, but they didn't just acquire Hollywood to sit there and not help Kyler Murray. Big time, I'm looking for Hollywood really bouncing into a better situation than he was with the Ravens, and that's what he was complaining about, just not seeing the ball enough as kind of a deep threat wide receiver. They're more about short to intermediate with the tight ends. So it was a good move for him to get out of there. And now Kyler Murray is going to help him put up some numbers, kind of like Lamar Jackson moving around to push the ball downfield, buying time to do so. All right, we'll talk about 10 more wide receiver sleepers right now, according to the expert consensus rankings on Fantasy Pros, these are the guys that are ranked a little too low in half-point PPR, so 10 more to talk about here. This episode is brought to you by Rock Auto. With the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now possible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts you need. Why endure often pointless or seemingly intimidating questioning and wait while the person behind the counter orders the parts on their computer, choosing the only brand their warehouse happens to carry? You have computers with access to rockauto.com at home and in your pocket. Save time and money when using Rock Auto. Why choose to spend 30, 50, even 100% more for the same exact auto parts from a chain store car dealership? Just take the Honda Odyssey fuel pump. You could have paid $353 at the chain store or only $216 from Rock Auto. That's a night and day difference. Rock Auto prices are reliably low for every customer that comes there. Doesn't just have to be a professional working on their car. You will be taken care of if you're just looking for that rare auto part that's hard to find and you can't find in the stores cheaply. They have everything you could need as well: brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, and even new carpet. All you have to do to take advantage of the great price of Rock Auto for parts that you're looking for, go explore their easy-to-use website today to find the solution to your auto part needs. And it's a good idea to go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car, truck. Right, locked on in the How Did You Hear About Us box so they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. You can find them at rockauto.com. All right, we will get into more sleeper wide receivers in a moment. Thanks again for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. We're free and available to you on all platforms, wherever you get your podcasts, as well as YouTube. All right, let's go into the next wave of wide receivers that have been underrated. Allen Robinson, I think he was disinterested. He didn't want to stay in Chicago last year. Really disappointing season. He was also hurt. Now he takes that role that was in Robert Woods' hands, and they went to Odell Beckham Jr.'s, playing off Cooper Kupp with the Rams, and now is a strong arm quarterback there in Matthew Stafford. So good opportunity for Allen Robinson. Remember, Robinson produced pretty well with Mitchell Trubisky and put up some numbers, even that tough Bears quarterback situation. So last year, just with that Andy Dalton, the Justin Fields mix, it was just pretty ugly there with Robinson and this lame duck offense with Matt Nagy. So he should be a bit rejuvenated here. He's had good waves with the Jaguars and Bears. It'll continue here with the Rams. They'll have a key role. I mean, he's a veteran receiver. He's good in the red zone. Cooper Kupp is going to get a ton of attention. And you look at Van Jefferson, there's a big drop-off between him and Robinson. So when you look at Robinson, I think he's going to be more motivated. He's playing for the Super Bowl champions. He signed with them in the process. Because of that, he wants to contend for a title here. So he'll be motivated, rejuvenated, all the good stuff there that you want for a receiver. And I think he can really finish as a nice wide receiver, too, here right now, being treated more as a wide receiver 3. We know how OBJ finished down the stretch pretty darn well, playing off the Kupp in the double teams. And Woods was pretty reliable wide receiver 2 as well. So all lines up pretty well for Allen Robinson to continue his career and produce well. Amon-Ra St. Brown is next, and people are just so cold on this guy a little bit. I mean, I know he was kind of a revelation, and he was the guy that needed to be there out of necessity last year with TJ Hawkinson hurting at tight end. They didn't really have much else at wide receiver. Quintus Cephas was not available either. But Amon-Ra St. Brown proved he was a top-notch slot receiver. I mean, these USC guys, I mean, we talked about Robert Woods. We had Pittman earlier. We looked at Juju Smith-Schuster that has been having big years in fantasy. This system is pretty good for wide receivers. It's been seeing some coaching change there in Southern Cal, but there's just something about the receivers there that they get that when you're not looking at Ohio State and Alabama, that you're looking out to USC for some good fantasy football receivers out of reality. Amon-Ra is just a good route runner slot. He dominates that position, but he's still their go-to guy. DJ Chark is coming off a major ankle injury. Jamison Williams is a deep threat that can have some appeal, but Jared Goff, the arm, the question is there. Williams is also coming off knee injury. Amon-Ra St. Brown's going to have a big role here in the short to intermediate work in the middle of the field. So I'm very confident in him, again, bouncing into that wide receiver 2 status instead of wide receiver 3. Then you have Rashad Bateman. We talked about the guy who left Baltimore and Hollywood Brown going to Arizona in that trade. Well, this is going to help Rashad Bateman. Bateman had his moments. He just didn't get enough volume. He just wasn't fully healthy. The first-round pick from Minnesota last year. But now it's basically him and looking at Mark Andrews, and they're improving the 12 personnel a little bit. So it looks like you'll see more of the 2 tight end sets. They added some nice depth in the draft there with Isaiah Likely and Charlie Kolar. They already had Nick Boyle there with Mark Andrews, so maybe trying to line up things at tight end. But Bateman's going to be on the field consistently as a wide receiver. Miles Boykin, they finally moved on from him. They're going to look more at James Prochet and Dever Duvernay as big play threats, but Bateman in a really good spot. They didn't just use a first-round pick on him to be a complimentary player. I think they also felt comfortable that he could take over as really the number one, and they were able to make that move with Hollywood Brown. So I do like this situation for sure for Bateman. Again, he's that more intermediate receiver. He's got good possession skills. He's also got good red zone skills. He's not going to be hit or miss kind of big play threat the way that Brown was. And we saw some games where Bateman was highly effective when healthy and given the opportunity. I think that will continue here, minus the targets of Brown and Jackson. Lamar should be focused quite a bit on Andrews and Bateman interchangeably as his new go-to guys. The combination, I should say. Andrews is still his go-to guy, but Bateman coming in right after that is someone he trusts. Now, there's been a lot of buzz about the Eagles and A.J. Brown, but A.J. Brown might be a little bit overrated just because we're not sure how the connection is going to be with Jalen Hurts. Right now, he's around 10-12 here. So looking at Brown, I mean, he was very productive, but he's already had some durability issues. He's a little bit younger there that still inexperienced. I know Devonta Smith is a second-year player and younger in relation to Brown, but you look at overall, I mean, he's got the pedigree. He was a Heisman Trophy winner. So I think having a presence of A.J. Brown is going to help Devonta Smith quite a bit, as well as Dallas Goedert, Jalen Hurts being a little bit better here. Smith is the more technical guy that you look at all over the field. He can put him in different situations. And I think he's going to be a volume-based play and just kind of with route running and the potential touchdowns. A.J. Brown is also a pretty good scorer. But I think A.J. Brown, as much as we want to get hyped about that, you have to keep in mind when you get a player like that that's going to see potential double teams, it's going to open up for the other young guy. And Smith, I think, can have a nice breakout as well. And finally, Hunter Renfrow in this segment. I still have 5 more to talk about that are beyond guys that were consistent options there as starters last year. Renfrow, he finished all the way up as a wide receiver 1 in half-point PPR. The volume is just so good. Pretty much everyone on the Raiders passing game dropped off the face of the earth, including Darren Waller. The wide receiver core was a mess. Bryan Edwards is the only viable option other than Hunter Renfrow. This year it's changed, of course, with Davante Adams in the mix, but I don't quickly see Renfrow just being dwindling down the charts here. I think you're going to open up the passing game. You also have the influence of Josh McDaniels, who we know does a lot of great work with slot receivers and that type of receiver in general, going back to New England. So that's going to help his role be pretty key. So is the attention Adams gets and Waller. Renfrow is going to be open quite a bit. And as much as Adams has that old connection with Derek Carr, Carr's had the more recent connection here with Waller and Renfrow. So I don't think he suddenly plummets into the deep wide receiver 3, maybe even wide receiver 4 territory here. Renfro's still going to have a big role. I mean, there's a trust factor between all those 3, and I think you'll see good production from all 3 guys, Adams, Renfrow, and Waller. You're playing off each other pretty well with McDaniels now calling the shots in Las Vegas. All right, that takes care of, again, 10 sleepers, underrated guys at wide receiver and half-point PPR rankings right now after the NFL draft, according to the experts. Conglomeration there at Fantasy Pros. Again, the next 5 we'll talk about, I think, very good values throughout the board at wide receiver. Reality, we know that was the case. Teams knew there was good depth in this class. There's also very good depth in fantasy football from that regard. Our partners at BetOnline continue to be the number one source for your betting needs and sports information. Now, it's still a great time for action here in May. We're heading to that great week end of auto racing with the Indy 500 and the Brickyard and Coca-Cola 600. Some good racing there overall. We know in NASCAR and IndyCar. We also have some great things here going on with the NBA playoffs and the NHL playoffs and Major League Baseball really getting into that crux of the season here. Don't forget, there's a lot of big boxing matches ahead. It's been a pretty nice month here the past several weeks, but good things you can look at, fights in UFC and in boxing. Find all the latest odds, news, and sports developments for all those sports there at BetOnline. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sporting wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. Head to the website today or use a mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game, or the match, or the race, or the fight starts. Check it out, BetOnline, your number one source for all your betting needs and information. All right, we will continue the show here and finish it up, breaking down five more wide receiver sleepers based on their current expert consensus half-point PPR rankings after the NFL draft. One guy that's in a really good position to play off Stephon Diggs and produce with Emmanuel Sanders gone, Cole Beasley is gone. You have Dawson Knox as a key target as well, but he's in the top three for sure. Gabriel Davis really came on the playoffs, developed a really strong rapport with Josh Allen. They've been waiting for Gabriel Davis to kind of establish himself as that outside number two that can play well off Diggs. Diggs still seeing a lot of coverage attention here. Yeah, you got to love Gabriel Davis. Again, this is a pass-happy team still. They didn't really adjust too much in the running game to say they're going to pivot there with Devin Singletary more. This is a team that wants to chuck it with the big arm of Josh Allen. This offense is loaded. This offensive line is really looking good. Diggs is very dangerous. That's going to help Davis. So Diggs and Davis show the D&D guys are going to put it up, and it's going to be like Dungeons and Dragons fantasy role-playing only in fantasy football with this double dipping Diggs and Davis putting up numbers. I just love how Davis can stretch the field if needed. He also has a big body in the red zone. Allen trusts him everywhere from short opportunities there in deep to getting the ball to him deep. So Gabriel Davis in a great position here to really outdo his deep wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 kind of status here. I think he's more solid wide receiver 3 when it's all said and done, based on the Bills' offense in which he can produce big numbers. Drake London is next. I mean, whatever you think of Drake London, he's going to play a lot off Kyle Pitts there with the Falcons. They don't have a lot more going on at wide receiver. So the volume alone, again, we're going back to Amari Cooper and Darnell Mooney. You got to consider that. It's a kind of a balance. You want just enough other weapons to not to smother a guy, but you also want a guy to be the clear-cut number one here in fantasy football. So it's a balance that you're looking for in those types of players. Drake London, and whatever you think of him, whether you think he was worthy of the top wide receiver pick in the draft over the guys that I preferred, Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson and Jameson Williams, he's still in a very good situation there where he's going to dominate targets. Where Olave is going to have to cut in with Michael Thomas. You got Wilson stepping in with Elijah Moore and Corey Davis. You got Drake London really stepping in with Olamide Zaccheaus, and not much here in this passing game for Marcus Mariota. The one concern is Mariota and the volume and the effectiveness there in throwing to him. But I think just like Pittman there that takes care of the former Falcons quarterback and Matt Ryan, London could be a key target for Marcus Mariota here all over the field. He's kind of a tight end body type with some field stretching abilities who can play well off the catch radius of Pitts. So that all lines up pretty well for Drake London, being very appealing as a top fantasy football wide receiver here in that bunch. Opportunity is important. Talent is equally important. London has definitely a good combination of both here as a rookie in 2022. Another big dude that's freakish that can stretch the field, can do a lot of things, Chase Claypool. And I think Chase Claypool was wasted a little bit by Ben Roethlisberger and his kind of dwindling, almost noodle arm at the end here. Now you got two pretty strong arm guys, whether it's Mitchell Trubisky or Kenny Pickett starting at quarterback here. I don't see Mason Rudolph being an option, but either one of those guys is just fantastic here to push the ball downfield and also to accurately get the ball to Chase Claypool. You know there's going to be opportunities on play action with Najee Harris in the running game. You have a good number one there in Deontay Johnson. You add a little bit of depth in the draft at wide receiver as well. You have Pat Freiermuth from the underneath routes, but the guy that needs to make a tick, and you guys have to see that from the Steelers, is that, look, it's a need to stretch the field a little bit better, open up the offense and the running game. And they wanted a guy that had some deep ball accuracy here, and Pickett certainly has that. Trubisky is a little bit shaky there, but he can push the ball downfield. So we'd feel a little bit better about Claypool should the rookie first-rounder Pickett take over from Trubisky. But I think Claypool just untapped a little bit with his abilities here. You got Matt Canada. Claypool's from Canada. Some things will line up a little bit better here, I think, for Claypool's production. He's just too big, too strong, too fast not to put up some bigger numbers. And I think they made a point of emphasis to do that here as they switch arm strength to the positive degree here, replacing Roethlisberger again in the short term with either Trubisky or longer term right away with Kenny Pickett. Al Lazard is pretty far down. I mean, he is the top receiver for the Packers and has the most trust now from Aaron Rodgers. We'll see what Christian Watson develops into. Is he going to be the more replacement for Marquez Valdes-Scantling, or can he develop as the number one for Davante Adams? But Lazard is going to be trusted. He's a guy who has inside-outside versatility for Rodgers. Rodgers really likes him. They have to feature him in the passing game. They got to throw to someone at high volume, and it's the MVP, folks. It's not some remedial passing game that's still learning the way. It's a guy that can deliver the ball with his big arm to anyone here in Rodgers. They've got a good offensive line. These cogs, these other weapons here, the tight end, the backfield, and Watson and some of the other receivers they're remixing with. Lazard is going to be a big part of what they do in the passing game. And again, he can line up everywhere. Rodgers is going to trust him. That's important. He's got good talent. So Lazard, I think, way down there as a wide receiver 4. I think at least decent wide receiver 3 consideration there, playing off Watson and playing with Rodgers here in Green Bay. The last player way down there, he's in the 40s in the rankings, and he finished as a solid wide receiver 3 last year again. It's Tyler Boyd. I don't see why Boyd is down here all that much. I know they kind of rebounded tight end after losing CJ Uzomah by getting Hayden Hurst in there with Drew Sample, but Hurst has been more of a blocking guy, just a guy in the passing game for the most part. Here, you still have the same 3 receivers with Joe Burrow. So you got Jamar Chase as a dominant number 1. T. Higgins finished there as a back end wide receiver 1 as well. So Tyler Boyd's going to have some trickle down opportunities playing off these 2 receivers. And again, Tyler Boyd is not the juiciest name. He's not going to light it up. He's not going to have a big touchdown total. He's not going to have that big play resume at all, but he's still a guy that has got a special skill set and good at what he does, getting open, running routes in the middle of the field. He found his niche pretty well in the transition from A.J. Green. He ended up being the go-to guy. Joe Burrow's not going to completely forget about him. And when you have other 2 receivers like that and you're using a lot of 11 personnel and Chase and Higgins are drawing attention, Boyd is going to see a lot of favorable matchups going forward. So, again, way down there, he's in the mid-40s, almost to the 50s there. That's a big drop-off from the 31 position he finished in the half-point PPR last year. So keep that in mind. I think people will have to look more about in relation to last year where they scored and to realize, is that somewhere around the ballpark? Are they going to be better or worse? And to figure all that, and that's what we're doing for you in Locked On Fantasy Football. On the flip side of this, we will tackle the 15 overrated players by their current expert consensus rankings in half-point PPR wide receiver. We'll do that on our Monday show, unless there's some breaking news. But we will have breaking news coverage tomorrow for you as we break down the NFL schedule and how it pertains to fantasy football here in 2022. Thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. Now make Locked On NFL your second listen. The schedule coming out is a good time to check in on Locked On NFL. The NFL never stops. Neither does Locked On NFL. Get insights and opinions from hosts including Ross Jackson, Chris Carter, and Tony Wiggins, plus local Locked On NFL hosts repping all 32 teams. There's no offseason for real fans, so make sure you're subscribed to Locked On NFL on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Just like Locked On NFL, we're available on YouTube, Locked On Fantasy Football, and wherever you get your podcasts, iTunes, Stitcher, and the like. So we're available there for you 5 days a week, most time of the year. We'll take a little bit of break when we get into June and July, but yeah, we're still bringing it to you, the advanced scouting you need to know to dominate in fantasy football. That's what we do. No nonsense, to the point, breakdown all throughout the season and off season. For Locked On Fantasy Football, this is Vinnie Iyer. Have a great rest of your day, and we will check in with our schedule reaction there on Friday to close the week.